welcome back to Your Life, Your Way. I'm your host, Kathleen McDermott. Marriage. Are you married? Going to get married? We're married. We're in a long-term relationship, short-term relationship. Relationships. They can be tough to navigate sometimes. Let's face it, we're human beings. My guest today, she was actually a guest on the Relationship Rescue Summit, so if you missed it there, you're going to hear it here. She's going to talk to us today about marriage and what it takes to work through some challenges that, let's face it, if you're married, you're going to have them. And how you can maybe change the perception of some things and how to improve, maybe go from a marriage that's struggling to a marriage that's successful. And a lot of this, most of this can also be relatable to just everyday relationships with friends, coworkers, and most importantly, the relationship you have with yourself. So take some notes, have an open mind. Having been married and divorced myself, I understand that sometimes we can begin to put up that wall and maybe be a little defensive, but have an open mind, listen in, and if you have further questions for Denise, please reach out to her. And here's Denise. Hello, and welcome back to the Relationship Rescue Summit. I am very pleased today that our guest is Denise Fitzpatrick, and she is a licensed mental health counselor and a marriage and relationship coach for women and couples. And she's committed to helping them all create a happy and healthy, thriving relationship. And that's what we're here to talk about at the summit, is how to create those healthy and thriving relationships throughout. I mean, everything from a partner to a friend, a coworker, a relative, even a stranger. She has a quote that I take it kind of personal to me in my life experience, but I'm going to share this quote, and then I'd love to have Denise share and tell us about her story. In any relationship, when one person changes, the whole relationship system changes. She's going to talk about that today and tell us exactly how that comes into being and the role that we play. And as we've been saying throughout the summit, that the relationship with ourselves is what touches them all. So Denise, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I would love to have you start by telling us, sharing your journey of what brought you. We all get a calling when we're doing this type of work. So what was yours and what brought you to where you are serving?
Yeah, and then if you want, I can also touch on that quote you just shared.
Please.
So, okay. So, yes. So my career started as a therapist. I always knew I wanted to be one. I'm not entirely sure why. I certainly knew that I was different from my family in that I always had a curiosity about sort of the inner workings, right? The emotional parts of ourselves, which was not super welcome in my family, but nevertheless, I was really into exploring and learning more about that. So I did have this sense that I wanted to be a therapist at a very young age. So I went in, did my degree there. I got my license as a therapist. I worked in a number of different mental health clinics, state-funded hospitals and facilities, and then went out on my own in 2007. And I had my own practice from 2007 up until about 5 or so years ago when I made this shift into coaching. And I made this shift because I felt like the therapy model just really wasn't working for couples. When couples are in distress, they need a plan. They need a strong leader and they need a plan. They don't necessarily need somebody that's going to just sit there, listen, kind of nod, offer support, offer compassion, which of course, all of those things are super important, but not when you have two people who have some highly charged emotions sitting in your office. So I knew that what was needed was something that was far more instructive and really led people down a plan and a process and a roadmap of how to really heal their relationship. And I found that coaching was exactly what was required and what was needed. So although I maintain my license, I now work with couples and women, as you said, in a coaching capacity, where it's really instructional. Like they're really learning some skills in how to communicate, how to connect, like all the things that nobody ever teaches us how to do, right? We just kind of get into marriage.
Exactly. Doesn't come with a manual.
Oh, there is no manual. And then we come across difficulties and wonder, why is this so hard? Why can't I figure this out on my own? I should be able to figure this out on my own. And it's because we haven't learned. And the great news is we can learn how to do it now. We just have to find the right support, because not everybody is equipped to help couples in this way. I actually did years of specialized training in couples work because I knew as a therapist, helping people individually was a very different skill set than working with couples. So, I'll say, just if anybody's listening to this and considering in their mind, like, I need to get help for our relationship, make sure you do your homework in terms of who you hire to help you with that. It really needs to be somebody that is trained and has a lot of experience in working with couples.
There's a point that I want to ask you, and because I've seen more in your history and your bio, that I also, in my mind, I feel it's also important to have someone that understands what you're going through, that maybe not have just had experience with certifications, but also life experience. Can you tell us a little bit about your feelings on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I healed my own marriage through the exact process that I teach my clients to go through, right? And so kind of coming back to that quote that you shared about, well, it only takes one. And I remind people of that because they're always like, no, there's no way. I've got to get my partner to come. Like, there's no way. Does it take, wait, if the other person isn't doing their work, then it's not going to change and I'm not going. Well,
Which you and I talked about before we hit record.
you know what? It only takes one. And I really want to kind of dismantle that belief for people, because I think that it really prevents them from seeking help, right? If they have a resistant partner, then they're like, well, then there's no use. But I will say, from my own experience, that's exactly how I changed my own marriage, was when I started taking a look at myself instead of just blaming my husband for everything, and really started to look at how I was showing up as partners. And now I say to my clients, okay, you're only thinking about the kind of partner you want, but not the kind of partner you are. And that was the piece that I was missing. And when I started to do that work on myself and started to shift my perspective and started to show up differently and really hold myself accountable instead of my partner, things really shifted. So I know clearly from firsthand experience, my own experience, that it does only take one. And while I do work with lots of couples, I also work with women individually who have done this work, who have changed their marriage. And when I'm working with couples, I often will separate them and do individual work too, because at the heart of it, they are each doing their own work anyway.
Yeah.
It's not about, okay, come on into my office and okay, now fix my partner. What solutions do you have to fix my partner? Right. And if you have somebody that's willing to do that for you, then you should run, because that's not effective.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
I think that was one of a couple of the biggest aha and the big turnarounds for myself personally that rolls over into my entire life is, what is my role? What is my role in everything that I do? And that was a hard answer to really face, because you really have to look at yourself and go, ooh, yeah.
Or you look at yourself, and what I encourage my clients to do so much is to look at yourself, but not through the lens of judgment or criticism, right? From compassion, from noticing,
Grace, yes.
awareness of, oh, okay, right, here's how I'm showing up in ways that aren't really in alignment with who I want to be.
Mhm.
I know that how I'm showing up is not really getting me the results that I want. And how could I do better? Again, not from a place of like judgment, because this is sometimes where people like go into this place of, oh, like I'm such a bad person.
I was just gonna say, yeah, you think you're terrible and
Right? So
it's, you've
never
learned it, so you can unlearn it.
right. And it's never about taking responsibility so you can blame yourself, right? You know, you don't want to be blaming your partner, nor do you want to be blaming yourself. But often what's at the heart of this, like blaming the other, is a projection of what we're not feeling. Like we have some wound inside us that
Mhm.
has yet to be healed.
Yeah.
We are not taking care of ourselves or taking care of healing that wound. And so we are projecting that onto the other,
Exactly.
expecting them or hoping that they will make up for that, for whatever it is we're feeling a lack of inside.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. And I look at that as forgiving yourself for what you did not know, and then embrace all the newness of what you can create
Mhm.
going forward.
Yeah. And when we're taking care of ourselves in a better way and loving ourselves, all parts of us, right? Because this
Mhm.
all have flawed parts and our partner has flawed parts. But chances are, if we can't accept some of the flaws that our partner has, it's because we're not accepting parts of ourselves. Right. So when we can fully embrace all of who we are and not make those parts bad or wrong or terrible, like, and we love ourselves anyway, then we are in a much better position to be more accepting and loving of our partner, who is also a flawed human being.
Exactly. Again, well said. And I know that one of the first things I hear when I'm saying and teaching and guiding is, well, people say, well, that's easier said than done. So how do you approach that
Yeah,
reaction? And
it
that's
is.
usually when the wall goes up.
Yeah, it's 100% easier said than done, right? It's simple, right? These are simple things, like simple ideas, simple concepts, but they're not easy. And so my question back to that is like, but why do you expect it to be easy? Like, whoever said it was easy, right? Like the effort that we put into advancing our career, or the effort we put into parenting our children, or maintaining friendships, that work is not easy, but we do it.
Mhm.
Right. And so I think sometimes when it comes to marriage, there's this myth that it should be easy. Right. And when we come into some difficult times, there's this idea that, well, it shouldn't be this way, it shouldn't be this hard. Well, who says? So the idea is like, hard work is not a bad thing if it leads to the outcome that you want, right? We get
Mhm.
into trouble when we stop working on it. That's why it becomes so hard. We hit rough spots, we throw our hands up in the air, we
Say,
say,
this doesn't work.
this isn't working, nothing's working, and then expect that it's either going to get magically better on its own, or we might exit the relationship. And my thought is, I believe lots of people end up exiting the relationship when it actually it could have been better. It could have been solved. But people just don't know how. And that becomes the issue, right? We have so many false beliefs, distorted ideas about what marriage should be like. And then when it doesn't kind of match up with the reality, they think something has gone wrong. So a lot of what I do with couples too is just education around, like I said earlier, dismantling some of these false ideas, beliefs, and fantasies that we have about what marriage is supposed to be. I mean, I was there. That's exactly why I was in the position I was in my own marriage. It's like, wait a minute, what's happening here? My husband's supposed to be like making me happy. Why isn't he? Why isn't
Supposed
he?
to be the storybook.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
told him what I need. I told him what I want. Why isn't he doing it? Right. And then so there's this expectation that I
Yeah.
just have to say what I want and need, which when you really think about it is more like that it's not sort of an emotionally mature mindset. It's more of a like this childlike mindset where it's like, here's the thing I want and need, and now you need to give it to me.
And I'm going to hold my breath and stomp my foot.
Which doesn't work.
No, and that comes back to my next question is it always comes back to the self. So if we're struggling with trust issues, feeling safe issues, and the expectations is a big one, that fantasy, that thing that, when we dream about the wedding, but we don't
Plan for the
actual for the life.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
And, having different goals. Each one is coming in with their own baggage, their own stuff.
Yep.
So if you're working with the individual, excuse me, who is carrying their own baggage, how do you work through that and have them see that? Number one, again, don't beat yourself up for what you didn't know. And this, I say it as this was never your stuff to carry. So how do you work through that to help the individual feel better about themselves and then feel better within the relationship?
Well, that's the stuff that I start with right away. And I will even, when I'm on a call with somebody to figure out whether or not it's a good fit for us to work together, I'm already laying the foundation for the people that are presenting on the call, potential clients. I'm already laying the foundation that this work is about owning your part, taking responsibility, reconnecting to yourself, strengthening that relationship first, so that I don't bring people in under some kind of false pretense thinking like, oh yeah, sure, come over here, and then I'm going to help you change your partner. So I'm laying this foundation from the start. So it has to also be a person that's achieved a certain level of emotional maturity, who is willing to do that work, right? So perhaps this is somebody that maybe has been in therapy before, or has done some of their own personal development and growth work. Like they're no stranger to that kind of thing. So they are willing and open to look at themselves. And I do have to emphasize the point that, okay, it's not about judgment, and you need to, have grace for yourself and compassion and love yourself, because that is even a bigger part of the work, is not just taking the responsibility, but loving all parts of yourself. Yeah. So I do bring people in who are already clear that this work is going to be about helping you both as individuals, so that they know exactly what they're coming into.
How do you find that when you're doing that work? Because again, the self, and we're talking specifically partner relationship today, but that same stuff carries over into every relationship, whether it be with children, friends, relatives, coworkers. How do you find that doing the work? How do they find they must find eventually that it is affecting and helping to support all their other relationships? How does that weave in and out of how you're working with them?
Well, I think a great example of that would just even be my own transformation. So I can just
Tell
share.
us. Share.
I started doing this work for myself, and I was changing the way that I was showing up with my husband. And that was like controlling my own reactivity. He would do something or say something or not say something, and I would just fly off the handle. I'd come at him, I'd blame him, all the things. And what I found when I really started to shift, and I felt like, wow, I really have a handle on controlling my emotions, being intentional about what I want to say, thinking things through, like witnessing my thoughts, witnessing myself so that I can choose differently. I started to be a much better parent to my children. Right. So parenting is one of the hardest jobs ever. I think everybody will attest to that. And so we have lots of moments where we probably don't feel good about how we show up with our kids. And I definitely had those moments. And I felt that that really changed how I showed up with them. I really started to make a huge effort to control my reactivity with my kids and just be just so grounded in whatever was coming my way. And I had a lot of challenges with my older son who has ADHD, and he got into some trouble in high school. And thank God I had done the work, because I was like really proud of myself for how steady I stayed during all of these difficulties, right? I could have laid into him. I could have lost my mind. I could have it could have been a disaster. And what he needed most from us was to be strong and to be steady. And I was able to be that because I had done this work. In addition to that, it also changed my relationship with my parents, because again, I think no matter how old we are, and I'm in like my mid 50s, but no matter how old we are, we still get triggered by our families, right? By our
Yeah.
parents, right?
Yeah.
And,
I could bring her in and have her tell you.
I would find myself like just falling right into that with my father, especially my father, falling into the pattern and walking away and just being so furious with him and letting it consume my mind and take up so much emotional space. And then I'd be angry that it was taking up space, right? Like this shouldn't be happening. So again, doing this work allowed me to really detach from that, to get a handle on my reactivity with him, to the point where like I'll walk away sometimes, like after having spent time with them, and kind of run through things and go and look at a situation and say, wow, I'm really proud of the way I handled that. Right. I didn't even get swept up in that. I didn't let his comments bother me. And like, truly, it wasn't just, oh, I'm not going to pay any attention to that. It was truly like I had released that. Like that's his.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So
And I get so excited in asking you to tell share more of your story, because every time I know this, that every time a woman does share her story, it gives another woman the courage to do or to share her story or to support others, but especially herself. And knowing that how you saw how it rolled over to being present for your children and your parents, it does make a huge difference. And please, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that, because I know it's going to touch at the very least one, if not more, for sharing that story, that it gives hope. It really gives a lot of hope that it is possible. But what happens if you can share the children, your parents, how do you find that when you were out in the world? And I find, if I have to be totally honest, it's still a practice, and it's forever going to be a practice. So if you could just share how you see that and how you explain to your clients that this is, you're not going to magically be now this, I hate this word, perfect, this
right.
completely 100% healed person for the rest of your life. You're going to have moments of what I call a review process.
Yes. So I think it is always a practice, and it is always a practice for me. It's something that, there are times where it doesn't feel like, those stages of competence. And so at first I'm consciously competent, which means I'm aware that I'm doing the thing. I have to be really intentional about it. And then you get to a point where you're unconsciously competent, which means you're just doing the thing. You don't even have to think about it. So I would say I sort of vacillate between those. There are times where I have to be really intentional, and then there are times where I just do it because that's who I am. But yes, there are definitely still situations where I may be super triggered. It doesn't happen very often, but where I have to work really hard. And that might still be with my kids, right? There still might be moments where they might push me over the edge and I'm not doing as great a job as I would like to. But what I like to equate it to a lot of times is with sort of a health or fitness journey, right? And it's the same kind of principle, right? We don't just make a decision today to, I'm going to work out for a month or 2 months or 3 months or a year or whatever and get fit, and then I'm going to stop doing that thing. Right? It still is a daily practice. Like, how am I moving my body? How am I taking care of myself? What foods am I putting in my body? Am I getting to the gym? Am I, working out? And at some point that stuff just becomes part of who you are and you're just doing it. But there are times where maybe you don't feel like it. You don't feel motivated to do it.
Mhm.
And you might have to talk yourself into it, or maybe have a week where you don't go to the gym and you eat really bad, but then you get back on, right? It's that same kind of thing. It's like, it's a becoming of who you are, not just like a what you do sort of thing. Does that make sense?
It does, it does. And I find, and you're right about the triggers, and what I found with the triggers that, number one, I feel it coming. I mean, you can feel it coming, which helps to determine how you're going to react. But there's times, and I say the same thing, go over the edge. But it's reached a point now through doing the work that I can say, I can stop. And if there's someone in front of me that's getting my reaction, I can immediately stop and say, oh, sorry, there's still something that I need to work on within myself. And a couple of instances, it's been on the phone with service people, and we all have a good laugh over it. But I like that now, that I can feel it coming, and and if I miss it and it overwhelms, I can come back and say, okay, I know there's something, and I can apologize if necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, that's what I say to my clients all the time, is you always have a chance for a do-over.
Mhm.
So as they're practicing these new skills and these new capacities within themselves, and they find that, oh, we didn't do so well this week because we ended up in that same old default place and that same old fight. And it's not a lost opportunity. Like, that's a moment for learning. And the
Mhm.
fact that they recognized it as, oh, that in and of itself is progress, like the recognizing. But I
Yes.
always say too, if you, after the moment passes and you feel like, oh, that's really not the way I wanted to do it, go back. You get a do-over. You say to your partner, you know what? I don't really like the way I showed up to that moment. Here's what I wanted to say. Here's how I wanted to handle this. Right. And so you
Yes.
can have that corrective moment.
May I ask, when you started to do the work within yourself and come into your partner relationship with your husband differently, how did he start to, was he surprised sometimes? Was he unsure? How did he open up to it?
Yeah, well, he's not a super talkative guy, but I could tell by the way that he was responding positively to me, right? So one of the things we used to argue about was he wasn't affectionate enough, or he didn't listen to me when I talked. So now, and I used to get really reactive to that.
Mhm.
And when I stopped getting reactive and I just would say, you know, why I need you to listen to me, or I need you to look at me when I'm talking. And he would respond in a really positive way.
Nice.
Um, but what also transpired during that time was I gave up alcohol, and that was a big thing that was contributing to some of the discord, because again, I wasn't showing up as my best self when I was drinking alcohol in that way. And when I gave up alcohol, I know that changed my husband's experience of me. And we were even talking about it recently, where he was just like, yes, like our marriage is so much better since you stopped drinking. So there was just a lot of work in there. The internal work, getting rid of these buffers that I was using to try and hide out from
Ah,
all sorts of stuff, right?
yes, and goodness knows we know how to hide well, and it's just not healthy. It just is not.
So that made a huge impact, a positive impact in my relationship with me, but in my relationship with my husband as well.
Did you have any other, you weren't seeing a coach at the time. So did you have another support system that you used, or
I'm giving up alcohol, or
is
just,
that, no, just in doing the work?
I was actually doing a lot of training in couples therapy.
So that's what was bringing you
That
to,
was kind of informing me. And while I was learning it, it hadn't quite clicked for me yet. Right. I was teaching it to my clients and I knew it sort of intellectually, but not in practice. And at some point there was that shift when I really started to embody that work. And then I got involved in some coaching programs. And even though it was a coaching program to help me create my coaching practice,
Mhm.
there was a lot of personal growth work that came from these coaching experiences, which also was huge in my transformation.
I can so relate to that in what you're saying, because I was teaching and going through my own turmoil and realized, well, okay, if it works for my clients, then it probably will work for me. So yes, and you do, once you embrace it and look at it from within yourself, it's a whole different world that opens up. And the reason I ask about the support, because there are those that will, not everyone is ready to work with a coach. I get that. I so get that. But it's important to have some type of support system. But I would also encourage that even coaches work with coaches.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with either going to therapy, working with a coach, but having that person who, as I said, who's been where you are, makes such a difference. And I did not have that. And as I said to you before we hit record, it would have been nice if I'd had you back then. Because it's having just that person that really, I mean, I had my best friend and she was my rock and she still is, but she'd never been where I was. And there's
Right.
just that little bit of difference of having someone that you can really relate to and can really hear and feel and understand your pain because they've been there. And it's the same with, being my mother's caregiver now. It's hard to talk to someone who's not been through that experience. So, and that's, I find, is the same with so many things. It's that relatability and feeling. You mentioned about not feeling like your husband was listening. I think as humans, we struggle with really listening to hear and to understand. And that becomes even more important when you're in front of someone like you who does, it actually is hearing. It's actually hearing because you've been there, you know what it's like.
Yeah. And that's one of the skills. I mean, it's again, that's something that sounds so simple, like listening, but in a couple that's highly charged and have been stuck in these same repeating patterns for so many years, that's actually the first thing that's gone. People stop listening to each other. They're not understanding each other. They're not seeing it through the other person's eyes. They're only seeing it through their own eyes, and it becomes this fight to be right.
Hmm.
And so listening is one of the most important skills that couples have to really get back to, because listening means really putting your own agenda aside and really focusing in on the other person and trying to really understand them.
And of course, that's something that we can take out into the world, because as a whole, listening to hear has really become a endangered process.
Yes. Yeah.
What would you offer as, let's do it two paths. First of all, what would you offer to someone who does want to work with someone who has been there, but they're a little, they're nervous? What would you offer them as baby steps or big steps, or what would you offer?
I would do your research for one. And I know that working with somebody can be scary, but think about what's the alternative, right? If you're in a really stuck place, you want to think about, where am I going to be 5 years from now? Where am I going to be 10 years from now? Also, no, you shouldn't be able to figure this out on your own, because nobody teaches us how to do these things. So there's no shame, right? I think that's something that prevents people from reaching out too, is thinking, oh, we must be really damaged if we have to go see somebody about
Good
this.
point.
Actually, I would say that the opposite is true. If you're reaching out for help, it takes a huge amount of courage, but it means that you care enough to get the support to make things better, right? It's the wait and see and hope where things sometimes get to a place where they're not salvageable, right? Like we can't turn back. So there's no shame in getting the support. In fact, it's a courageous thing that you're doing for your marriage. And like you said earlier, is we plan so much for the wedding, the party, but we don't plan for our life together. So think of getting the support you need as a gift that you're giving yourself, that you're giving your marriage, right? Because you're giving it a chance. And then the other piece, of course, is do your research and make sure you find somebody that's really skilled in helping couples. You might want to ask them, like, how much of your practice is working with couples? What kind of specialized training do you have? How many couples have you helped? If you have somebody that's seeing individuals, couples, adolescents, and the list goes on, that might not be the right fit. Because what I've seen happen is people go to the therapist, they're worse off, and not always, but some, because I think there's also the point that there are good therapists that don't recognize that working with couples is a different skill set. So they might offer it even though they're not equipped to do it. And so a couple might come from that and be like, okay, we must be in really rough shape if the therapist can't even help us. Maybe we need to dissolve our marriage. So most importantly is make sure you find somebody that's really skilled to help you.
Well said. And actually, you kind of covered both paths and all of that. So that was beautiful. Is there something that you can offer from a heartfelt, supportive, because you know there are women that are getting that voice in their head that's saying, don't do that, you can't do that. And then you also have maybe the voice of other family members that are saying, oh, that's ridiculous. Don't, you don't need to tell people your problems. What can you offer that can help them find the courage, move through the fear, and just get support?
Well, one thing I would say, and I recommend this to all of my clients, is don't share your stories and all of your venting with family and friends, because they're going to be on your side. And they're going to say things like, oh, what a jerk, you should leave him, or da da da, right? And they only know one side, right? And so if you're really interested in fixing your relationship, I'd say don't continue to talk to family and friends. It's not supporting your marriage when you've got somebody who's just taking your side. And then how to move through the fear. Again, I would say, ask yourself, where do you want to be? What is it you're really desiring? Where do you want to be 5 years from now, right? Are you just waiting it out until the kids get old enough and you can leave? Are you waiting it out until the kids leave for college? Like, really ask yourself, like, what kind of life am I living now? Am I just existing? And if I am, then that kind of is your answer. Because I know for me, whenever I am feeling like this is not where I want to be, I think about, okay, what do I need to do next? Right. And I know not everybody is wired that way. But if you're really feeling like you're unhappy in your marriage, but you really don't want to leave, you really want to make it work, then just take that risk, take that leap of faith. Like, just, there's no other way to do it. It's like ripping off the Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Right.
Well said.
But I will say that most of the couples that I work with, and we're a couple months in and things are starting to shift, and the thing that they always say, I hear this a lot, is, I wish we had done this sooner.
Mhm. I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
I'm sure you do. Well, I can't thank you enough for everything that you have shared today. And as I said, whenever we tell our stories, it just gives courage to others to share theirs. So thank you, Denise, so much for everything that you shared, and Denise's information. And I'm sure she'll be offering a little free something. We'll have that all available. We do have that all available to everyone to participate, and her contact information, her web link, and all her information will be available as well. And I thank you all for being here in the entire summit and just taking bits and pieces or whole trunkfuls from all of our speakers, because working on our relationship with ourselves just enhances all of our relationships. And that is such a beautiful thing. So thank you so much for being here. And I wish you all much peace and many blessings. Thank you. Wow. Marriage. Denise shared a lot today. And I almost don't want to say a whole lot, because you're going to have your own takeaways and your own, all the stuff that you yourself want to process. Because even if right now you have an amazing marriage, there are still things that you can take away to make sure that it continues on that path and support other relationships that you have, but most importantly, the one with yourself. So please remember, as Denise says, and as I too say, always give yourself grace, compassion, love. Be strong, be steady. You've got this. If you think that there's someone else that can benefit from today's episode, please feel free to share with them. Here at Your Life, Your Way, if we can just touch one woman and help her find her way, then we've done our job for that day. Do the work, take care of yourself. Be back for more episodes. Love to have you in the community. Again, I will have Denise's information in the show notes, as I do for everyone. Process. Be good to yourself. I wish you all the joy, peace, blessings, love that you deserve. Thank you for being here. Namaste.